Hi, everybody. I'm Naomi Eisenberger. I'm co-founder and executive director of the Good People Fund. I know many of you who are on here tonight and a few I don't know, but I'm excited and really happy to welcome you to this, our first webinar, Good People Talk Live. I apologize, first of all, for where I am. I'm actually sitting on my bed. Was not my preference. I had hoped that I would be sitting at my desk to have this discussion, but I had a knee replacement a couple of weeks ago and discovered I can't really sit at the desk very long. So if you see the camera wobbling a little bit, it's just because I'm moving my leg. This is the idea for tonight's webinar came about several months ago while we were all living in the depths of this horrible pandemic that has gone on now for 12 months. And as I was working very hard at my desk one day and having a discussion with Andrea Good, who works with me, and Glenn Rosenkrantz, our marketing communications consultant, I think that I commented that if I didn't have the work that I do, I don't know how I would get through what we were all living through. Because the interactions that I'm privileged to have as the executive director of the Good People Fund really keep me juiced. It's probably the best word I can think of. I always wish that I could envision the endorphins that must be flowing through my body because of my daily interactions with the good people that we fund and mentor. Remembering that and thinking about the technology, most of all Zoom, which is where we were conducting most of our business, all of us, over the last 12 months, I started to think, why can't we share these great people and their stories with everyone who knows about our work? And why couldn't all of you be inspired by their stories? I know from the past 20 plus years that I've been doing this, that those people who have traveled with me either to Israel or to see our programs here in America, all come away incredibly inspired and moved by being in the presence of our good people. And truly, one of the best outcomes of this technology is the ability for us to do what we're doing here tonight, and to give you all a glimpse at three people, all located in Detroit, whose stories are moving, inspiring, and really prove to me the goodness that we have in our world. And this is the first webinar. We have another one scheduled for April 11th, where we'll be meeting with 4 of our grantees that are working in refugee resettlement. You may wonder, how did the Good People Fund end up in Detroit? Many of you know that a lot of what we do is very purposeful, and we're very nimble. And about 5 years ago, I guess it was, I must have read an article about Detroit, the city, and the challenges faced by the residents of Detroit. And I started to do a little bit of research to see exactly what the situation was there. And I came across I guess it's an organization called Detroit Soup. And this goes back almost exactly 4 years ago. was April of 2017. I reached out to the person who started Detroit Soup, which is actually, I think it's a gathering once a week, I believe it is, or maybe once a month, where local programs are invited to come in and give a pitch. And the people who attend pay, I think, $5. They get a bowl of soup. I think it's above a bakery, and they get bread. And these local programs come and make a pitch for the work that they're doing. And I reached out to the founder of that organization, and she shared with me some of the new upcoming programs that were running in Detroit. And one of those programs was something called Detroit Horsepower, which was started by a young man, David Silver. And it intrigued me because the Good People Fund, as many of you know, have been very much involved in horses, more so in Israel and therapeutic horseback riding. And I couldn't really imagine horses in the city of Detroit, but I gave David a call. And that was, according to my email, which I saved, it was April 30th of 2017. And I asked David about his work, and that began a conversation that has gone on for 4 years. And a little over a year ago, the Good People Fund started to fund Detroit Horsepower. And this past summer, during the unrest of the Black Lives Matter riots that were occurring across the country, I reached out to David again. I was struggling within my own mind as to what we, the Good People Fund, actually do to help people of color, the community of color. And I reached out to David and I said, are there any programs that you can recommend in Detroit that were founded by people of color? And David, I think you said to me, give me a couple of hours and I'll get you a list. And in about 20 minutes, I had a list of 4 people. And on that list were Courtney Smith and Sherelle Hogan, who you will all get to meet very shortly. And so there was great intent in our efforts to see what we could do as a small organization to help in the city of Detroit. And I will tell you that after 25 plus years in this work, listening to the stories of Courtney and Sherelle were incredibly moving. And I decided that we would take their work on along with David, who we had been supporting, and see what kind of effect we could have on the youth in Detroit, who have so many challenges in front of them. One thing that I want to say before I ask the 3 of them to speak is a little bit of housekeeping, that if you have any questions as they come to you, put them in the chat box, and then we will do our best towards the end of this during our Q&A to address your questions, and either I will answer or our panelists will answer. Without much more to say, I would like to introduce our 3 panelists and grantees with us tonight. First, because I don't see how they're showing up in on your screen, but first is Sherelle Hogan, who is the founder of Pure Heart Foundation, a beautiful, very, very meaningful program that addresses the needs of children whose parents have been incarcerated. Our second panelist is Courtney Smith, who is the founder of Detroit Phoenix Center, which is a drop-in home for homeless youth. And finally, David Silver, who is the founder of Detroit Horsepower, that I spoke about earlier. I'm going to ask each of you to spend about 3 minutes telling your stories, and then we'll get into some further questions. Sherelle, let's start with you.
Good evening, everyone. Naomi again, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on a panel with you, Courtney and David, and I'll jump right in. So, like Naomi said, my name is Sherelle Hogan. I'm born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and I am the founder and CEO of Pure Heart Foundation. I started Pure Heart about 6 years ago. May 23rd, it will be our 6th year in operations, when I noticed the lack of support children of incarcerated parents had. If I can give a little of my story, when my mother was 6, she went to prison. When I was 6, my mother went to prison. And when I was 7, my father went to prison. And they probably ended their incarceration sentences around me reaching about 14. And from their incarceration, I experienced a lot of psychological, physical, and mental abuse. And I recognized as a little girl that children of incarcerated parents and people in that circumstance really didn't have support. I can remember being a little girl in a courtroom watching my mother and father be handcuffed, and no one checked about my emotional state or well-being at that moment. So from there, I grew up to, I went to college. I fought through the physical turmoil of still being imprisoned, even though my parents were released, because of the psychological devastation that I had experienced in my childhood. But I got connected to a mentor who spoke positive things into my life. And then I went on to college, began to work in corporate America. And then I understood that just because you go to college and find yourself in corporate America is not fulfilling when it comes to your purpose. So I quickly began to search for my purpose. And when I began to see God and ask him to lead me, he spoke the vision of Pure Heart Foundation. And I quickly listened to his voice. I quit my job and I literally went all in with Pure Heart. So 6 years to date, we have serviced about 2,500 young people, providing immediate intervention and support and wraparound services to really create a system that will break the cycle of generational incarceration. Just to give a little background about Michigan statistics, 228 children and young in Detroit has had at least one parent incarcerated before reaching the age of 10. And the ratio is 1 out of 10 in Michigan and 4 out of 10 in Detroit, Michigan. And they often fall through the cracks of poverty, homelessness, the lack of resources, the lack of education. So Pure Heart literally wanted to intervene and create a cycle of hope and awareness that would ultimately dismantle the school to prison pipeline system and create a new cycle and break the cycle of generational incarceration. So I don't want to go over my time, but that's who I am. That's what I stand for. Outside of Pure Heart, I authored a book called The Prisoner's Kid that's behind me. And I spoke and I've had a national book tour, going to facilities, sharing my testimony from the perspective of a child, because they're often forgotten and their silent struggles is now being addressed because of Pure Heart.
Thank you, Sherelle.
You're welcome.
Courtney, tell us a little bit about yourself and Detroit Phoenix Center.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Courtney Smith, and I am the founder and CEO of the Detroit Phoenix Center. And much like many young people growing up in the city of Detroit, I experienced endemic poverty. Like Sherelle, my parents were incarcerated. My mom, her rights were revoked. And my dad's rights were revoked for my siblings and I at a very early age. And so by the age of 3, I had been to 6 different foster homes, and I later got adopted, but what the system calls a failed adoption. where I was forced out of my home at 15. And even though, my life was strained, I experienced a lot of, just like many young people growing up in the city of Detroit who experienced foster care or adverse experiences, had experienced physical, mental, emotional abuse, but I found my solace in education. I read a lot of books because even in my adopted family, I was exposed to education. So I found my solace in school. And so reading became a safe haven for me, and I excelled academically. I graduated from high school living in a homeless shelter. And one day while I was living in the shelter, I challenged one of the staff about a policy that the shelter was having. They did not address my concerns. And so I sent an email to the CEO about the policy, and the shelter implemented the policy. And many of the youth that were living in the shelter at that time looked at me as an advocate. That was a very pivotal moment in my life because I knew that my voice had power. I was later invited to serve on the board of directors for that organization as a youth. And that really enforced my desire and gave me a lens into looking into see what the nonprofit world looked like. So fast forward many years later, I went on to college. And I graduated from the Honors College at Eastern Michigan University. And I worked in college access and retention, working with first generation college students and students who were also in foster care. And so following college, I had an opportunity to take a train journey across the country with 25 other millennials nationwide to solve a crisis in our community. And the crisis that I chose was the crisis of youth homelessness. Having done my honors thesis on the lived experiences of homeless college students and also just knowing the challenges that many young people face on the street, I traveled across the country. And what I found out on the train was one, the youth felt that their voices were not being elevated. Two, that those leading the organizations, they didn't look like the youth that were being serviced. And three, the models that I've seen in other communities would be better served in Detroit if adapted well. And so came back to Detroit, convened a group of young people, and we built out what is known today as the Detroit Phoenix Center. We are a high impact nonprofit organization that operates the first and only drop-in center for youth that are in crisis, particularly those who are experiencing homelessness or street connected. So a young person can drop in, they can take a shower, they can wash their clothes, they can access a food pantry, we have academic enrichment, wraparound services. We provide coaching and case management to 150 youth year round, but we provide case management and really intensive support to about 30 of those young people. We have served 2,000 youth to date. We've been featured by the Biden-Harris administration for the work that we've been done. We've been honored internationally from Detroit all the way to Brazil about the model and centering the voices of youth. And I can go on and on about the work that we do, but we really work to provide a safe space for young people to thrive, because we believe that every young person deserves a place to call home and the tools and resources that they need to live out their full potential. 1 in 5 youth in Detroit that experience homelessness are victims of human trafficking. And there are about 15,000 children and youth who are experiencing homelessness on any given night in Detroit. And 1,100 of those are in the Detroit Public School Community District. And so we really want, and we have been a resource and a support to those young people to improve the outcomes so that they can live healthy and safe and thriving lives.
Thank you, Courtney. I think now people understand why I love my job. David, last but certainly not least, tell us about your journey.
Well, before I do that, I just want to take a moment to honor the personal stories that have been told so far by Sherelle and Courtney. It's both inspiring to hear your own personal journeys, and I fully expected to be the least inspiring panelist on your Zoom screen tonight, but to have seen, from a little bit of distance, the work that you've been doing for many years. Very humbly, here to share my story, and with a huge amount of appreciation for your leadership and your personal commitment to moving the needle for youth opportunity in our city. So thank you for the work that you do. I'm not from Detroit. I grew up in Westchester County, the well-off suburbs of New York City, where horseback riding was a huge part of my life growing up, something that I took for granted, to be perfectly honest. My mom grew up with horses, and she passed on that love and that opportunity to be a competitive horseback rider to me and my younger sister from a very early age. And it wasn't until during college I took a step back from the intense competitive riding that I had had a huge amount of privilege and opportunity to enjoy in my formative years, and became very passionate about education and finding my place in opening doors for young people growing up with far more challenges on their path to success than I ever could have imagined. That led me to join Teach for America, which recruits recent college graduates to teach all over the country in underserved school districts, and placed me in Detroit. And I had actually never been to Michigan before, and been living in the city of Detroit since 2012. And for those first 2 years, 2012 to 2014, I was a 4th and 5th grade teacher at Burns Elementary Middle School on the west side of Detroit. And during that time, I was really influenced by the research on social emotional learning and the character skills that research shows underlie success in school and in life. And as I was working to bring those conversations into my classroom about confidence and empathy and perseverance and other research-based traits, to cite examples from my own personal experiences, horses and the opportunities that I had had with horses were consistently the answers that I was giving of how I had had the chance to shape those critical internal tools that we use to overcome challenges in our path. And as I was having conversations with my students, it was disingenuous in a way, because none of my students had had anywhere near the opportunities that I had been given. And maybe somebody kind of plopped them on a horse for a pony ride, and you kind of get led around and time to get off. That's all, that is for the most part accessible. And I was kind of stewing over what role that I could have in unlocking the potential of our young people growing up in the city. Became really, over time became clear that I had an opportunity to step outside the classroom and start Detroit Horsepower to provide the high impact youth development opportunities that I had been privileged to have to young people like my students. And so that's what we've been doing since 2015. Our current model brings students from Detroit to partner horse barns outside the city that donate the use of their space and their horses for us to operate our free summer horse camps and an after school program. While we make progress towards the long-term goal, which is to locate a new urban equestrian center on a large piece of vacant land in a community that wants horses to be part of the neighborhood's future, so that we can scale the number of youth that we can serve, the depth of their experience, and contribute to the fabric of stronger Detroit communities by turning vacant land into a community asset. And we can talk more about that, but that's enough from me.
I think, David, the idea of having an equestrian center in the middle of Detroit was what really got me when we first talked, because that was very much a dream at the time that we first met. And right now it's a little bit more than a dream. It isn't yet happening, but you are well on the way to making it happen. Before I ask our panel some specific questions, I just wanted to comment that you've just heard 3 people with very, very unique perspectives. David, perhaps, in many ways is least like, but I think that they all represent, they're all very representative of the kinds of people that the Good People Fund looks for. And with that in mind, I'm going to ask each of you to to comment on what do you see is sort of the value of having a personal narrative or a personal struggle to create a vision of change. Is it absolutely necessary? And does it inform you every day? And if it does, how does it inform you? It is very indicative of all of our grantees. But here specifically, I'd love to hear from each of you how you think, what your thoughts are on this. Courtney, do you want to start?
Yes. So first of all, I just want to thank you for having me as a panelist. And I want to thank Sherelle and David for sharing this space with me and for sharing their personal stories and their personal narratives. Everybody has a personal narrative. I think it's important for folks to know their why and use that to inform their vision for change. However, I don't believe that is necessary for someone to have a personal struggle in the sense of us glorifying trauma. Because the reality is no young person should have to be without a home and the basic needs that they need to thrive. No young person should have to grow up feeling as if they are alone or left out. But I do believe that lived experiences qualifies folks in a way that that not having a personal struggle or lived experience does with the work that we do, because you can center the voices and the lived experiences of those that are being served. But I think what's more important than having a personal struggle or a personal narrative is knowing what your why is. And if you know what your why is, then you can lead with that and listen and to those who have those lived experiences and center their experiences. But I think that a personal narrative is knowing your why. And that is what informs the vision for change. Because if you don't know why you're doing the work that you do, or you don't know your own story, then you're not going to be grounded in your service delivery, and you're not going to be grounded when challenges come your way.
Thank you, Courtney. David, do you want to comment?
I'd certainly echo everything Courtney just shared. I think the only thing I could add, I'm sure Sherelle could add further, you know, owning your narrative and being fueled by work that's deeply personal is empowering and propels you through, you know, a lot of challenges along the path, you know, in the nonprofit journey of being a, you know, founding executive director. There's always a steep learning curve, and you know, nobody's speak for myself, trained me to be an executive director. I imagine the experience is similar, and to, you know, have that passion fueled commitment to the work, to knowing yourself and knowing this work matters, is essential to persist and know that there are people counting on you, because you have something valuable to offer, and there's nothing that's going to stop you from reaching that goal.
Thank you. Sherelle?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Courtney and David. I absolutely think it's not necessary for you to have lived a struggle or faced a challenge to qualify you for founding an organization or being a change agent. However, I will say you can't be what you don't see. And a lot of times my scholars, they enroll in the program very shy and very hopeless. But once they find out that I not only founded the organization, but I was literally in their shoes, it motivates them to want to fight for themselves. And as a leader, it gives you, it's a term that we all use sometimes, secret sauce. And that secret sauce is just because you can look I call our baby scholars, in the face and say, if Miss Sherelle can do it, you can do it too. And to be able to give them that hope, not from research or not from just recognizing the need, but actually living that, gives them a sense of trust like never before. And then also, sometimes you're not able to articulate how being in a circumstance make you feel. And I have learned throughout leading Pure Heart that if you hadn't had a parent incarcerated, you honestly just don't know how it feels. And words sometimes can't even articulate that feeling, but just knowing that you can relate to it, exemplifies that. So I think that's the advantage that you have from living an experience. But I think the last point of the question is, how do you stay informed? And a way for me is, I recognize that the services and support that I needed when I was 6 and 7, when my parents were incarcerated, is different from what the young people need now. So it gives me an opportunity to elevate the work that we do through making sure that we're servicing the current need, even though it's still the same circumstance, if that makes sense.
Very much so. Very much. All of you, I know the work that you are doing might look easy, but we certainly know that it is not easy at all. So I'm going to ask you, Courtney and Sherelle, first. What are the challenges that you both face as Black women who are trying to establish and sustain your organizations? And don't hold back. I know this is a tough question, but Courtney, do you want to start?
It is a loaded question. So I kind of pared it down just to make it more digestible. I think that one of the greatest challenges as a Black woman that I've experienced leading and sustaining the organization was, and it still is, mental health. Being a Black woman and needing to show up for my organization or the organization that I lead as a leader, while still combating, social economic challenges that we face, systemic racism, oppression, it's hard, and still dealing with your own trauma. Like the trauma, it qualifies you to lead. You can relate to your young people and really use the programming to use your experiences to inform program development, but there's still healing and there's still trauma that's attached to that. And so leading the organization and being inundated with the traumas from the young people that you're serving and the families, and then the trauma of your own family and your own situation, it's important that you have tools such as a therapist or a mentor, because it can become overwhelming. In the wake of COVID-19, we saw thousands in our community die. It was a point during COVID where every single week someone that passed away, I knew them. I think about the day that the Detroit Phoenix Center opened. I learned just a few, days earlier, my youngest brother, died by suicide. And so mental health, and I still needed to show up. So on the day that the Phoenix Center opened, I got the call that, my brother passed away. And I still had to show up that day, get in front, say the speech, and be there and show up. And that's the reality that many of us face every single day. As a Black woman, you have to wear an S on your chest as a superwoman to truly, truly show up for your communities. And the young people that I service don't know, a lot about some of the traumas and some of the things that we face day to day in terms of securing funding, and needing to, the very first funder we ever had, said to me that I was a flight risk. I was 24 years old. I was a Black woman in Detroit, a Black young woman in Detroit, the youngest that they ever had funded. If I was not of color, I wouldn't have had that conversation wouldn't have never happened. And so, Black leaders, we have to dismantle systems and be a champion for our communities while still being affected by racism, trauma, and oppression. And I'm just going to leave it there because I know that Sherelle has her own, experiences that she would like to share. But if I had to pare it down, I would say the mental health, the funding, and also just navigating systemic barriers that you face.
Thank you. Sherelle?
Absolutely, Courtney. It's interesting because those were my 3 points. Literally, I'm like, how do I narrow things down? But to take a deeper dive into the mental health part is where I really want to communicate about. I remember when I first founded Pure Heart, I was, I think, 25. And I would have these meetings with funders and I would break down the systems and why Pure Heart needed to exist. And I was always told that I needed to stop being an emotional leader. And I had to articulate to the funders that it's an emotional position. You are experiencing your own trauma every day when you serve your young people because they share that same experience. And then also Heartbeats is attached to an organization. How can it not be emotional? And as a leader, it's my responsibility to care. And if you're telling me how I, allocate my funding to make it a more fitting look is disservicing the resources that our young people need. So I quickly found out that as a Black leader, it's so easy to be faced with compromising positions when it comes to funding and when it comes to being invited into different spaces because they almost want you to forget who you are and become someone else. And of course, when I say they, I'm talking about people that's not of color and that have a different opinion on how organizations should be led as far as leadership. So I'll stop there, but that's what I really wanted to communicate about because that's a very interesting space to have to live in daily. Knowing that funders want to service, they want to fund programs, and they don't see teaching a child how to use a sanitary napkin and providing that napkin is more critical in a sense than, buying them a book. They're both very, very important. But if our young people don't know the basic necessities or how to, have the basic needs, they won't thrive. And if you're not from a community of poverty, you won't understand that. So just being able to articulate the needs of our program is very, very critical and sometimes challenging as a Black leader.
Thank you, Sherelle. David, you're coming to this from a totally different perspective. Can you add, is there anything that, any challenges that you face as a white person in Detroit?
Well, to pick up on the 3 threads we've been spinning through, so I don't face the systemic barriers that Courtney and Sherelle have grappled with their whole lives. And when it comes to mental health, I think the coronavirus pandemic has highlighted the importance of well-being for every person. But what Courtney and Sherelle have both been truly vulnerable in sharing is a level of lived trauma that it consistently re-traumatized through the deep personal connections we all make with our students that resonates in a very different way. For me, when I'm having a home visit with students that have lost a family member, it's not resonating with a personal experience. It's tapping into the empathy that we learn from horses and the family environment that we provide as part of our program, but it's not the same. I think that funding was the other thread that I might be more aligned to speak to. Just in a general sense, you know, we have a kind of perverse dynamic in starting up a nonprofit where you really need to demonstrate some level of programming and impact in order to get funding, and you can't get your wheels turning and provide those much needed services without initial funding. And so in that regard, you know, I'd just like to highlight the immense amount of privilege that comes from you know, having savings and family members who, you know, were there to help me out if this nonprofit journey that I was taking didn't work out and I was tough on my luck. I knew I had a safety net to go out there kind of on this ledge and start a new organization. So I would put that out there as, you know, certainly something that I've experienced of, you know, working really hard, having a shoestring budget, you know, wishing we had more resources, and then you're kind of getting to a level where you're finally getting some attention, getting some more significant funding, and it starts to flow a little easier after you've been, you know, working as hard as you possibly can for several years. But there is, you know, that ability to take a leap of faith, to bet on yourself, I have to say is easier when you're coming from a place of both more access to resources and a network that can potentially, you know, be early social investors, if you will. And so, yeah, I think, you know, as a white person working in a city that's 82% African American, it's been critically important to continue to build my own body of knowledge when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, how that plays a role in the curriculum we develop for our students, our hiring and our recruitment of board members, volunteers, and the role that we play in solidarity with Black-led organizations on behalf of the students we all serve, has been critically important, and one that I know I'm still growing in, and I'm grateful to an outstanding number of mentors, especially leaders of color, who have been willing to invest their knowledge in me and help bring me and Detroit Horsepower along.
Thank you, David. This question is directed directly to Courtney and Sherelle specifically. I mentioned early on that I reached out to David with intent to find leaders of color who were doing work that basically followed our model. And I think when we all spoke, when I spoke with each of you, I expressed my discomfort, but I did share that with you. And I said that for me personally, it was, I don't know if I used the word embarrassing, but it was uncomfortable for me. I guess the question I have is, how do you view that approach to philanthropy, or to just making this a better world? Are there benefits to it, or are there more red flags than there are benefits? Courtney, your mic's hot, so you want to answer that first?
I think that first, Naomi, I think that it is wonderful that you reached out to David, and David connected you to me and Sherelle. So thank you for being intentional in that way. And thank you for embracing what I like to call productive discomfort. I think that it's necessary for us all to embrace productive discomfort and have cultural humility and understanding and have uncomfortable conversation and interracial, intergenerational as well conversations. So I think that there are benefits to that because we learn from each other. And one of the benefits is shared power and resources, which we know that historically marginalized and BIPOC communities have been left out of. And of course, I have to say, again, kudos to you all because we're now connected to each other. I think that a red flag that I look for is tokenism. And if the company is funding Black-led organizations, or we saw through the wake of the pandemic, a lot of social corporate philanthropy movements, and they're like, we want to fund Black organizations. But then my question is, what does your board look like? What does your staff look like? And to me, those questions answer whether or not you're just looking to write a check to say that you're doing something good, or if the values that you say you hold are really true.
Sherelle?
Drops mic, Courtney. No, seriously. But I echo that. I do also want to commend you, Naomi, for having the conversation. It's interesting because Pure Heart, we're starting a podcast called The Forgotten Conversation. And I think this conversation is often forgotten, right? We're not really talking about how it is to be Black leaders. And if we are talking about it, we're talking about it to other Black leaders. So for you to host this and to start the conversation is brave and bold. And I commend you for having the courage to be uncomfortable, but also wise enough to know that not being comfortable is a space to grow in. So thank you for that. And that truly means a lot to me. I think one of the red flags for me is exactly like Courtney said, when people try to connect with Pure Heart to exploit my scholars, or also to say that they were attached to something. And it's quick to decipher because their intentions just scream, I just want to say that I'm attached to it. A lot of people, they see what you post and they see the magnitude of the progress in which your organization has made, and it's appealing to others. But once they get close niche to the organization and recognize that it's so much deeper than optics and it's so much deeper than events, that these are children that is living an experience that once the camera goes off, their parent is still incarcerated. So you can easily tell who's in it for the right reason and who's not. So that's my take on it. And I definitely am honored to have discernment, and I'm definitely honored to know what I can call a spade. And if I don't think that you have a pure heart, you won't be attached to Pure Heart. So I'll stop there, but that's my take on it.
Okay, thank you. David, question for you. Do you think that the challenges that kids are facing in Detroit are unique? Or do you think that the work that you're doing and Sherelle and Courtney are doing could be easily transmitted to other cities with similar problems?
Absolutely. Detroit has some particular challenges, but they're emblematic of systemic disinvestment in our highest need communities and restricting resources and opportunities away from communities of color. And so if we look at whether it's other urban centers around the country or underprivileged communities that aren't in a city, I think, in our case, the life lessons we learned from horses are universal. This is not something that there's nothing wrong with our Detroit students. These are the skills that I had the privilege of learning through my experiences with horses. And it's about leveling the playing field to ensure our kids in Detroit have the same kind of high impact opportunities as their privileged peers growing up in the suburbs. I think that the second layer that Detroit Horsepower sees the opportunity is at the community level, and Detroit does have a significant challenge of vacant land spread out across our city limits. And so finding the right space that's appropriate for horses and in a community that wants horses to be part of the neighborhood's future, and turning that vacant land into a community asset, a hub for neighborhood life, and strengthening the fabric our students grow up in is something that horses can uniquely address because they provide such quality opportunities for youth development, and horses take up a lot of space. And so there are some outstanding urban riding programs in cities like Philadelphia and Los Angeles, Hartford, Connecticut, and the list goes on and on. Decades old organizations that we've learned a tremendous amount from, and they operate on 3 acres or 4 acres. And so to have a partnership with Detroit Public Schools to reactivate a 14-acre demolished school site in the heart of the city is something that other cities can only dream of, having that access to contiguous open space, and taking the time to understand that not only is this a great opportunity for an urban equestrian center, but it fits community-led goals for what they want to see in their neighborhood's future, is something that we've been really intentional about, something that we're tremendously excited about opening this future facility by 2023. And certainly we get calls from folks in other communities around the country trying to understand if there's anything that I'm an open book in terms of there's so many people that have poured into me and helped shape Detroit Horsepower to where we are today, that I love talking with folks in Minneapolis and Rochester, New York, and Birmingham, Alabama, and St. Louis, Missouri, that are seeing these opportunities in their communities. And I love getting those emails and having those phone calls and staying in touch with folks along their own journeys, because these are universal opportunities that I hope we can spread.
Thank you. I just want to, because we're juggling time here, if any of you, there's a few comments and questions in the chat. If anybody else has any that they would like to add, please do so now, because I'm trying to judge how much more we can get into before we have to. We've got 5 minutes left. I would like to just mention on our call tonight, on our webinar tonight, is Larry Olnick, who is another Detroit grantee. He was not part of the panel. We restricted the panel to programs that are working with youth, but Larry Olnick is an amazing, amazing man who spends many days a week riding around downtown Detroit, feeding hungry people and doing much, much more than just feeding them. He has, I have been with Larry on the street, and he knows all of the people that he helps by name. He knows their stories, and he has helped many, many of them get off the streets. So we've made a significant investment in Detroit, and I'm really excited that that we have done that. A couple of the questions that are in the chat, Sherelle and Courtney, or one or both of you, can you explain what you mean by whether a supporter has a pure heart or not? I guess, Sherelle, you were the one that used that term.
Yeah.
So why don't you?
So in my description of someone being genuine, I was just being clever by adding Pure Heart, because the name of our organization is Pure Heart Foundation, right? But if I had to explain what I meant by that, it's just someone simply is, just having the heart to serve our young people, and just having the right perspective and being genuine and pure intentions is very critical, because our population of children is very vulnerable. And in order to serve them, you must have a clear conscience, right? A pure heart, and recognize that your service is so critical that it can either hurt or help elevate the work that we're trying to do. So it's very important that anyone that affiliates with our organization has genuine spirit when they're serving our young people and families.
Okay, thank you. Courtney, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that Sherelle hit the nail on the head. I will also just add, being trauma informed is super important. And so simply what that means is knowing the effects of trauma and what that does for a young person. A lot of times when we get volunteers, they may look at the youth that we service and they're afraid of them, or they don't necessarily understand the nature of trauma. And so they judge them as bad, or they label them as, delinquent. So it's really important to understand trauma where you're looking to serve youth who've been heavily impacted by it.
Thank you. There was one other question. There was a comment, first of all, from somebody watching in who thanked the three of you for the great work that you're doing. And there was a comment to me to ask if I could explain why I felt uncomfortable approaching you, Sherelle and Courtney. And I think when we spoke the first time, I explained to you, maybe it's the generation that I come from, but I was uncomfortable. But I also felt that telling you that I was uncomfortable. Anybody who knows me knows that I say what's on my mind. And by telling you, I think that I believe we established a stronger connection. That was my impression anyway. I don't see any more questions here. So I would just, first of all, I would like to thank the three of you for agreeing to be part of this first webinar. I hope that there are many more to come. There is a new message that just popped up. Let me see. Do you feel, the three of you, that your issues are getting the attention that they deserve right now? If you can give me a quick answer on that.
I would just say really quickly that the social issue for us, I think that COVID-19 really exacerbated some of the challenges that many of the young people that we face serve. Do I believe that it's getting the attention that it deserves? No, but I do think that it's been brought to a national scale, and more people are aware of why it's important for every young person to have their basic needs as a result of COVID-19.
I agree with that also. No, I don't feel like it's, receiving the attention that it needs, but I will say prison reform is one of the topics that is being communicated across this country now. So I believe if we keep elevating the work that we do, because 2.7 million children currently have a parent incarcerated, and 5.1 million children has had a parent incarcerated before reaching the age of 10. So I think the world is recognizing the silent struggles of children of incarcerated parents and them being the victims of mass incarceration now. So it is my prayer and hope that as Pure Heart and other organizations around the country doing similar work keep pushing forward and pushing that needle, it will then receive the attention. But we're definitely being elevated, especially with COVID-19 and the lockdown in the facilities. Most of those inmates, right, are fathers and mothers. 92% of men incarcerated are fathers, and 80% of women incarcerated are mothers. So, yeah.
Okay.
I just, I can keep going.
I've got now there's a load of things that are streaming in. One of the questions is that, what can, we will provide contact information for the panelists. And one of the questions particular that I see, what brings all of you hope? That's, I think, a really significant question. How do you go about, I know I struggle some days, and I'm at a different level. You're in the trenches, all three of you. So how do you hold on to hope in a very quick? David, you want to jump in?
Well, as a former teacher, you have to hold on to those positive moments because they may be fleeting, especially when you're in your first year. And so I hold close to the experiences of our students and the hope that I have for the gains that they've made, the opportunities that are opening, and the people that they're becoming, and so many more that we'll be able to serve in the future.
Me really quick, I hold on to one God because I know that I was called to this work. I just didn't roll out of bed and think of this idea. I know that he literally took my pain and turned it to purpose. And another thing that I hold on to is our scholars. All of them at some point felt forgotten. And when I founded Pure Heart, I made a promise to them. So it's no longer about me. It's holding on to hope for them. If I don't do it, who will step up for them? Who will be their voice? So that really keeps me grounded. And even when I'm faced with adversity as a leader, I hold on to what they need still. And I recognize that moment or that hopeless moment isn't worth not answering the call to God and not being responsible for what I started.
Courtney?
Yes, I would have to echo all of what David and Sherelle said. My faith is a very important piece of this work. My faith in God, and knowing that this work is so much bigger than me. That if I don't fulfill my purpose, there are literally young people who are on the street today that may not have a place to live. And so the hope that I have is seeing the young person who was living, on the porch of the church move into their own apartment. It is seeing the young person who may not have known that they could graduate from high school as a result of our program. My hope is in the young man who came to the Detroit Phoenix Center that was recently released from jail and just needed to take a shower. And my hope is in my faith and in the youth, and the faith of the brilliant, resilient, amazing, creative, talented youth that we serve every single day, and the spirit of Detroit and the youth that we serve. That's what keeps me going.
Thank you. David, there's one question that popped up for you specifically. What do you feel is the experience the youth take with them from the field trips with the barn partners, emotionally and spiritually?
There's absolutely something spiritual about connecting with horses. But I have to say that, we travel significant distances to generous partner barns that welcome us into their space. But it's not a space that our students can own. We don't necessarily know the next time we're going to be back at that particular barn, with those people and those horses. And so it does, set up kind of an unstable opportunity because our students don't have a home base in terms of the horse setting of their own, something that they can rely on, can come to every day after school, during breaks, on the weekends. And so we're really looking, as much as we appreciate those opportunities to get outside the city, see something different, meet with people from a different background. We know that those kinds of outward facing opportunities will come from a secure place of strength when our students have a space of their own that they have ownership of, that's accessible in their community. Horses need care 365 days a year, and there'll be an opportunity to connect with horses at our future facility any day that they want. And that kind of dependability and sense of self and the identity that comes from seeing themselves reflected in a space is something that we're just not able to provide at this time, and something we really look forward to in the future.
Thank you. Our time is over. Again, I want to thank our three panelists. I want to thank all of you who joined us tonight. I hope that you got as much out of this as I did, and as I do every day as I go about doing this work. I want to also, before we end, remind you that April 11th is our second webinar, where we will be hearing from 4 women who are working on resettling refugees in the US. And finally, last but not least, none of what happened tonight would have been possible without Glenn Rosenkrantz, our marketing consultant, and Andrea Good, who some of you know keeps this all running smoothly. And finally, to Boris Kievsky, who is our tech guru, who certainly without him, we would never have been able to have done this. So again, I thank you for all of you who are celebrating the upcoming Passover holiday. I wish you a good Passover and a happy Easter to the rest of you. And now you can go watch the Grammys. Good night.